Straight ahead on Folks, we continue Pause for Pride, our salute to Black History Month, as we meet Mayor John Joseph of Opelousas, the first black mayor of this 267-year-old Louisiana city. Then a stimulating discussion of affirmative action in the 80s, all on today's edition of Folks. Hello everyone, I'm Sonya Masingale. Welcome to another edition of Folks. Well, today is the last Sunday of Black History Month, but we're still celebrating with yet another first. Today's Pause for Pride, Mayor John W. Joseph of Opelousas. Earlier this year, many of us watched statewide the inauguration of Mayor Joseph of Opelousas as he quietly and firmly took the vows to serve to his fullest capacity as chief executive of that city. We visited John Joseph at his City Hall office in Opelousas and found him to be an extremely capable man. The city of Opelousas was founded in 1720, which makes it the third oldest city in Louisiana. This is the home of the legendary Jim Bowie, creator of the Bowie knife, who died at the Alamo. It is in this picturesque southern town where another bit of Louisiana history has occurred. John W. Joseph, a retired school teacher, became the first black mayor in this city's 267-year-old history.
When I announced, I knew full well that black had never served as mayor of Opelousas before. I knew full well that in the 266 years history of our country, of our city, that we did have blacks in the latter years who qualified for citywide positions, and even in the black community, there was a difficult problem getting blacks to support a black citywide. But I felt that I could surround myself with a quality staff, and we were able to do that. And I felt that with hard work, we could present our candidacy to all of the voters of Opelousas. And I felt that they would recognize that I had the credentials. When I say credentials, I presented to them 32 years of public service. I offered a candidacy of 18 years of administrative experience. And being a retired person, I could give the city full-time service. And with all of those considerations, I was very optimistic, and I felt that John Joseph could be and would be elected mayor of the city of Opelousas.
Although he is the first black mayor, Joseph believes that his qualifications and not his race were what got him elected.
The fact that I'm black had very little to do with the campaign or the election. I campaigned citywide. My campaign staff was multi-ethnic. I appealed to all of the voters of Opelousas, and I presented my candidacy to all of the voters of Opelousas. And I believe that voters of Opelousas voted for me because they felt that I was qualified. I think they voted for me because they felt that I had the experience that would enable me to serve them as their chief executive in a manner that they wanted from a chief executive. And I believe they voted for me because they recognized that I could give the city full-time service. And race had little to do with my election.
Who is John W. Joseph, the man?
John W. Joseph is a family man, a religious person, interested in helping as many persons as he possibly can. If it were not for that interest, if it were not for that concern, I wouldn't be wearing the title mayor today. I have, as I mentioned earlier, retired, and I could be at home with the wife, traveling, enjoying the grandchildren, but because I'm interested in people, because I'm interested in my community, I decided that I would avail myself and serve, and I have been putting in long hours since I've been here. As a matter of fact, several days ago, the wife said to me that she had lost a husband, and I assume my long hours are largely because of my interest in concerning helping as many persons as I possibly can. John Joseph is not on an ego trip. I'm not here to promote John Joseph. I'm here because I feel that I can impact upon Opelousas.
Mayor Joseph is indeed a family man with 8 children and 3 grandchildren, but the campaign for mayor tested his family ties in new ways.
The family was supportive of my decision. This was a new experience for all of us. I've never run for a political office before. I have served in several organizations as an officer. Those were educational organizations, administrative organizations. I've held statewide positions in statewide organizations, but I've never run for a political office before. So it was a new experience for us. The wife was very supportive. She campaigned alongside her husband on several occasions. We walked the streets together. We made a number of campaign appearances. I campaigned for 7.5 months. I conducted a very active campaign. I talked to whomever would listen. I accepted all the invites, and there were a number of those. And I went wherever the voters were. The children are basically out of town, but they did come in for the final and major rally, and they were here for Election Day, and we are organized, and we found a spot in the organization for them. So they assisted on the Election Day to get their father elected mayor of Opelousas.
Opelousas has a population of about 20,000. That makes it the largest municipality in St. Landry Parish. As with other cities in the state of Louisiana, the #1 problem is unemployment.
Number one is get jobs, revitalize the economy. Opelousas is no different from most municipalities. We are suffering from a sagging economy, and we have a high unemployment rate here, and we would like to get some jobs. We have begun an industrial inducement committee. I activated that committee several weeks ago. We are in the process of drafting a brochure for the city. We're in the process of preparing a slide presentation, and we are going to market this city actively. We're going to sell this city. We have a lot of resources here. We have a lot of expertise here, and we have a lot of history associated with our city. So one goal is to revitalize the economy, and in order to do that, we need jobs, we need businesses, we need industry to locate here. So we're going to set into motion efforts to get industry and business to locate here. A second goal would be to finish this fiscal year in the black. We have determined that we are not going to operate on a deficit. And a third goal is to keep Opelousas afloat. There are persons who feel that the walls of the city are going to come tumbling down because I have been elected mayor of Opelousas. Since I'm the first black, I'm determined that that's not going to happen. Fortunately, those who have that feeling are in the minority, and the majority of Opelousas happens to be rallying behind the mayor, and I'm very appreciative for that.
How do you want to be remembered as mayor?
I would like to be remembered as a chief executive who worked for and in the interests of all the citizens of Opelousas, giving of himself, giving of his time, giving of his energies in order to promote and foster a better city, in order to place Opelousas on the map where it rightfully deserves to be. One of the most progressive cities in South Louisiana. I want to be remembered as a person who did what he could to help the persons who needed help. I am a believer in religion. I am actively working in my church, with my association, with my state convention, in order to help people, in order to promote Christianity, and in order to get as many persons educated as I possibly can. So John Joseph is a believer of helping whomever needs help.
That was Mayor John Joseph of Opelousas. Now on to the next portion of our program. As the 1970s dawned, so came a new era of equal opportunity by federal mandate. It seemed to be a time of reckoning for blacks, women, and other minorities. Finally, by specific law, public institutions were encouraged to allow all Americans access to education, employment, and other opportunities regardless of race, religion, or color. Either that or suffer the consequences. But now, not 20 years later, black Americans, women, and other minorities are reporting a backslide of those affirmative action goals. During a recent interview, Civil Rights Commissioner Mary Frances Berry called it a weakening of the enforcement of civil rights laws. Here's what she had to say.
Basically, we've seen weakened enforcement of the civil rights laws that are on the books. We've seen weakened enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. In fact, the administration tried first to keep the Voting Rights Act from being renewed in a strong way. They wanted to dilute it. And then the Congress didn't go along with that. And since the Congress passed a strong Voting Rights Act in 1982, they have been enforcing it by using some standards never intended by the Congress. I mean, it took 4 more years for the Supreme Court to tell them that no, Congress meant exactly what it said. They have been weakly enforcing, if at all, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which is the one that says that institutions should not get federal money if they discriminate on the basis of race. And no institution has really had any kind of threat or worried about the federal government or anything, and higher education institutions are included. And this has come at a time when the numbers and percentages of black students who are going on to higher education have been decreasing every single year. And one of the great hopes for our future had been that we would have upward mobility through education. And so you've got this weakened enforcement across the board in every single area that you look, that the administration has been trying to turn back the clock. Affirmative action, they started in with a running battle against it, trying to define it as something other than what it is. Affirmative action, according to their definition, was inundating employment and universities with unqualified black folk, when anybody who looked around at the unemployment rate could see that that was not true, and anybody who looked to see who was in the most prestigious universities and who was in the most prestigious jobs could see that that was not true.
So what is happening to equal opportunity laws, and how is it affecting us here in Louisiana? Here to discuss the problem is Lester Pourciau. He's the Associate Director of Personnel Services and Director of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action at LSU Baton Rouge, and Helen Perrott, Equal Opportunity Specialist from the Civil Rights Bureau, Office of the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Resources. Welcome to folks. The first question is for you, Lester. What is affirmative action?
Affirmative action is a plan that was established through the Executive Order 11246 that remedies present effects of past discrimination. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson signed this executive order into effect. And what it did was, right after the Civil Rights Bill was passed in the same year, legislators thought that it did not give enough weight to just saying that an employer must not discriminate. He must hire and seek out minorities and women. And this executive order did that for us. This was in September of 1965.
Okay, well, what does this all mean? Does this mean that women and minorities are given preferential treatment when it comes to jobs and school and loans and what have you?
I think it says, I think that that's the concept that some of the organizations who are fighting it with the present administration, the contractors and the like, and some of the special interest groups are now fighting them, National Manufacturers Association. And I think what it really says is that you must open the door, allow minorities and women to come into the workplace. It does not give preferential treatment in the way that people are saying it now. It only allows them to come in. We find that through affirmative action, we've opened the door and let these people come in, and now we have a whole new group that are helping in industry and education and the like.
Well, that's good news. Well, just how common and how valid are the allegations of preferential treatment for women and blacks? I mean, is that true? I mean, are people just bypassing all of the qualifications you need for a job, Helen?
Absolutely not. The law says that women and minorities should be given equal opportunity. And realize I said opportunity. And the law says that the best qualified applicant should always be hired. However, what we're striving to achieve is to give the women and the minorities the opportunities that they have been denied in the past. And hopefully through an affirmative action program, we will identify those minorities and those women who have superior qualifications so that they can join the white male in the workforce.
That's
One other point that I want to make, that we do take affirmative action for handicapped individuals and individuals who are veterans of the Vietnam era. So we have affirmative action plans for both groups. Minority women is one plan, and then handicapped and veterans of the Vietnam era.
Okay, so why does it seem like we're losing grounds in the fight? I don't understand. We've got these laws in place, the companies have the policies in place, and yet suddenly there's this big slowdown in the hiring of women, minorities, and everyone else.
Well, for one thing, we have not had any major legislation passed in the past administration. And up until, from 1949 up until the present administration, every president had passed some legislation dealing with civil rights. And as you could imagine, during the past administration, we have had some court decisions that were very promising to us, but no legislation. And enforcement has always been a problem.
When I set out to do this particular portion of the program, I contacted several private employers, and all of them said, well, we've got affirmative action bylaws and policies and what have you, but right now we're not hiring, as if I was looking for a job, which I wasn't. But I couldn't get any of them to come out publicly and discuss their affirmative action policies and what they're doing. Do you have any idea as to why this is?
Well, of course, in the crucial economic times that we're going through, you're going to have some problems. An affirmative action plan discusses how you recruit minorities. We keep, as Helen knows, a applicant flow log, and that says that the sin is not always a sin of commission, but one of omission, that you don't encourage enough minority and women to walk through your doors to apply. In a time when you're laying off, that's going to be real tough on you. And of course, we all know, and we've had some recent court cases, that went both ways on us about the last people in or the first ones out when we have a layoff. So that creates a problem. But in Louisiana, especially during these times, I can see why those people would have problems coming on, because they're not hiring anybody, and they are probably had set large goals in certain job groups. Well, they can't get those goals because they're letting people go. I hope that when times get better in Louisiana, we'll see affirmative action pick up again. At LSU, it's a little different because we have to hire professors and faculty members. But we do have layoff problems, or we have had them in the past in the other areas. So I think the economy has a big problem with that.
Helen, would you agree with that?
Yes, and I might add that we did have a Supreme Court decision in July of 1986 that did uphold the affirmative action concept of preferential hiring practices for the protected group. And as Lester said, it's not only women, minorities, Vietnam veterans, and handicapped individuals.
I see. Both of you work for state agencies. Is it easier to enforce this type of legislation or this type of goal in a state or a public institution than it is in a private?
Well, I've only been with a state agency for 3 years. I was with Ethel Corporation for 10. the struggle or the fight is the same in either place. I mean, it's not an easy task in either a private industry or in a public sector. It is difficult. It is difficult to eliminate some of the preconceived notions by the people who hold power and the people who do the hiring. I think that in my time at LSU and in the private sector, I find that the people in public sector have a stronger commitment because there are laws that deal with them in the state and in the federal laws, and they have a better commitment, I think, to affirmative action from what I've seen so far.
Helen?
I've been working in the area of civil rights in state government since 1974 and have been very actively involved in affirmative action and equal employment opportunity programs since that time. And I find that in my traveling around the country, attending seminars that are sponsored by the federal government, that we in DHHR are far advanced over the federal government itself, who has issued these guidelines that we must follow. And we have been diligently following the guidelines to the best of our ability since 1974, because as a state agency, large amounts of money come through DHHR, and we must follow these guidelines in order to receive these federal funds. And we are far advanced over many of the federal government agencies, and as far as I know, over most private employers.
So would you agree with Mary Frances Berry that we're seeing a weakening of the enforcement of certain acts of legislation? For example, that certain people or schools or institutions cannot receive federal monies if they practice discrimination in any of its forms. Have you seen a weakening of that in other areas?
I think there's always been a weakness in the enforcement area in affirmative action and equal employment programs. In some of the conferences that I've attended, sponsored by the federal government, the last count they gave, there had only been 2 contractors who had ever been disbarred from receiving federal funds because of a lack of an affirmative action program. So I think that there is maybe not a weakening, but there has always been a very lack of enforcement.
Lester?
I failed to mention something earlier when I was talking about what is affirmative action. It's important to note that deals with contractors, people who receive federal funds. You have to have contracts of $50,000 or more and 50 or more employees. Well, that includes us because we receive federal grants. And as Helen says, there's always been that problem. Only 2 people in the 22 years of this, of Executive Order 11246. Also, those 2 contractors that have been debarred, it took years and years and years, and they gave them all the opportunities to not to be disbarred. So there is a problem. Okay, one other point that I'd like to make. Helen and I were both at a conference recently given by the federal government, and what she's saying is so true. The federal government has tried to change the way they do Executive Order 11246, the way they enforce it. Well, this has gone on for so many years. We have an 8-factor analysis in the executive order, and they've tried to change it to 4 factors for 15 years, I guess, 10 years for sure, and they've not been able to do it. So, I mean, something needs to be redone with the whole way it's done right now.
Will the ERA help us at all?
I say no,
And why?
because I think that we already have all the laws on the books that the ERA would entail, and I think there again, enforcement is the key word. We need to enforce the laws we already have. We don't need any more laws. We need enforcement.
It's only going to come by executive order.
A dedicated president.
Lester, would you agree with that?
Yeah, but I think it wouldn't hurt us. I think that ERA has some real good points that I think could help us in this And it also brings back up that there is still segregation out in the workplace. You know, I think some people, again, have forgotten that happened. Okay. So I think it couldn't hurt us.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your
You're
opinions.
welcome.
Thank you.
We've been talking to Lester Pourciau and Helen Perrott about affirmative action in Louisiana. Well, that's it for this week's show. Be sure to join us next week when News Director Rob Hinton brings us a special report on AIDS. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.